And get started. Can you see my screen? I believe it's being shared now.
Yep,
okay.
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So today we are going to go over SmartList tips and tricks. And we're going to start off with a few easy tips and tricks, and then if we have time, we'll throw in one that's a little bit more advanced. So the first thing I am going to show here is how a shortcut to get to SmartList. So most of the time when we're accessing SmartList, we're going to go into Microsoft Dynamics GP and then select SmartList. But you can add it to your top toolbar here. If you go to this little layout button on the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select Toolbars and select Standard, you now have these three little icons here. The first one with the light bulb is for SmartList. So I can select it and go into SmartList. So now that we're in SmartList, we're going to go over just a few tips and tricks on how to hopefully make your reporting life a little easier. So let's look at a SmartList. Let's look at a financial and account transactions. So if we were going to look at this account transactions and we wanted to change the name of some of our column names, we can easily do that by going into columns here and highlighting the column that we want to change the name of and then making the changes. So instead of it saying credit amount and debit amount, I'm just going to say debit and credit. Instead of saying account description, maybe I just want to say account descript. I can also take this and move these around. So if I want to move the account number to the top, I can easily do that just by clicking on it using the arrows on the right-hand side to move it up and down. So now I have this report that just says debit and credit, and I have the account number as my first column. If I wanted to take this report and save it, I can just select favorites, put in the name of the report as I'd like to save it, and select if I want to change, make this visible to the system, to the user class, user ID, or company. Typically, you're going to go between system, company, and user ID. So if I make it just for my user ID, then other users will not be able to see this report. So I can make the changes to it. I can just say add favorite. If I then decide that I want to come in and change this report in any way, maybe I really don't like the account number being there and I want to move it back down. After I made the changes to the report, I would have to go back into favorites and select modify. I could also go into favorites and change the settings so that now it's no longer visible to just my user ID. I could also make it visible to the system. So if you have a report that you build for yourself and then find that others may want to use that report, you can always come back in and make those changes. Another thing that we can do here is if we go into our search, right now this has 357 account transactions. If I go into search, I have my maximum record set to 1,000, so it's not going to give me more than 1,000 transactions. If I wanted to limit this to 200, I could limit this to 200 and say, okay, now the report's going to run, and we only have 200 accounts. The reason that you would put something like this in place is so that you don't have some of these huge reports that take up all your resources running. But you do have to make those changes on a report-by-report basis. Unless you go in, there is some additional setup in Microsoft Dynamics GP where you can come in to some of the setup and make the changes so it will default to always over 1,000. We typically don't recommend that because then you can run into reports that are going to run a long time. I would recommend looking at it on a report-by-report basis. So one other thing that we can do here with this is we can go into our columns. And now that we have our columns here and our names, we can, if we want to add a column, we can select add, go to all columns, add any additional columns. Again, once you add a column, you'll have to move it and come back and resave that report. There are some, if you wanted to go into your report, you could go in and say that we wanted to sort this by our highest debit account. We could sort this by our debits, and then we can go in to our search parameters, and we could put here that we wanted to see their maximum records, 10 records, have this saved so it's sorting by our debits, and we would see our top 10 highest debits. All right. So that's a little bit about how to do a few little tips and tricks. The other here is if we want to increase this width. In the newer versions of GP, this bar here does move to the left and right. You can increase the width, and you can keep clicking on it and increasing it multiple times. You can also click to decrease it. And then once you run a report, it can move this. You will see it sometimes move it over to the left a little bit further. So if you need to increase that width, that's the way. You just highlight anywhere in this little white area, right-click and say increase width. So if we were to refresh this, let's see if it'll go back. Yes, and there's also the little arrow here. It's a little hard to see at the top left that you can click. So those were a few easy tips and tricks on how to change the number of max records, how to change our column names, how to change the order of our columns, and then how to add a favorite and modify a favorite. Now we'll go in and do something a little bit more advanced. So let's go into our sales line items, and let's look at this report. Let's change this report to only look at our invoices. So we're going to say SOP type is equal to invoice. Oops. To invoice, not to order. Okay, so that's going to bring up 598 line items. So this is going to show me every invoice. We're in a test company, so again, we don't have that much data, but you could also go into your search and put a date range there if you wanted. So we've got all of the invoices in the system and all the line items on those invoices. So I'm going to export this over to Excel. Now that this is in Excel, I can go in and record a macro so that it will make the same changes to this report every time I run it. So I'm going to go in and do that now. Let's go into View, and let's go to Macros, and oops, let's record a macro. I'm just going to name this one sales. You will need to remember what you name your macro because you will need that information later. So say sales. And then I'm going to go in and insert a pivot table. Say okay. And let's set up our item number and our rows. Let's do our values, extended cost, extended price, and then let's also go in and add in our gross profit. I'll say a gross profit. All right, standard price, I'll start the cost. Okay. Now this one has, because it's a formula, it has multiple decimal places. So I'm going to go in and format these columns so they all have the same settings. Let's just do number. Let's do currency. Just make it look a little cleaner. Okay, so now we have our extended cost, our extended price, and our gross profit. So let's filter this and do the top 10 gross profit. So we have our top 10 gross profit. So say this was a report that we ran every week or at the end of every month and got the same information. So instead of running through the same process week after week after week or month after month, we could record this macro, save this, attach it to our smart list, which we'll do here in just a minute, and every time we run our smart list, it would then run this macro and generate this information for us. So I'm going to go into my macro. I'm going to stop recording the macro. Now, because I've already recorded the macro and saved it, I can now need to come in here and remove this data. So I've removed all the data. The macro should still be here, name sales. And now I'm going to save this as a template. So if I save as, I'm just going to save it on my desktop so I can access it. And I'm going to name this sales as well. I'm going to save it as a Excel macro-enabled template. Save it. And then let's close this. So now that I'm back in SmartList, if I go into my SmartList options and go to Export Solutions, I can then set this macro up and attach it to a report. So I'm going to name this Sales. Navigate out to my document, which was, I thought, on my desktop, which I don't see it now. Let's see. Let's see if I can save this on the desktop. Okay. Let's go back and try that again. There it is. Okay, so this is going to be a completion macro. So that means after we export the data into Excel, then this macro is going to run. So this is where I have to put the name of the actual macro. So the name of our macro was sales. And we're going to use Excel for this. And so now I have to find the report that I'm going to attach it to. And because I didn't save this report that we created earlier where it saved the invoice, so let's go ahead and save this. So I would go into my favorites. Let's just name this sales also. Now I can pull this back up, go under my sales line items reports. Here's my sales report. Now I've added this macro to it. I can select save. Close this. So I'm going to go back to that sales report that we created. If I now go to Excel, you'll notice that there is a little black arrow underneath Excel. If I click that, it now gives me the option to run sales, which is the running it with the macro that we have created, or I can just do a quick export, which would just export the data and not run the macro. So I'm going to select sales. It's going to export our data, and then it should open up Excel just like it normally does, but it should also run our macro. And it usually doesn't take this long. We are on a test box that we have set up for our test environment, which is a little bit slower. And it's having a problem with, it looks like maybe a security issue on this machine. Let's see if we also save this report. Close out of Excel. If I can get over. We'll try it once again because I did have it open and see if it will export that. Oh, okay. So I built one right before this for testing that worked fine, so I will show you. There must be a bug instead of troubleshooting. Yes, there's something with the bug in the sales line item macro. So if we go in, we have one that's exactly like this that I ran earlier today. It's called Sales BG. It's the exact same report. If I go to sales, the name of the macro on that one was Test BG. You can see it has the same line, same data, should have the exact same pivot table, and it should work fine. So here is our Excel sheet. You can see it's the same data, but it did pop up our pivot table. So here's the data that it exported out from Excel, and then here is the pivot table that it created. And you can use this not just to create pivot tables. You can just do something if you wanted to put some formulas here to calculate the gross profit here, do some sorting. anything like that that you wanted to do, you could do it to your Excel sheet, record it with your macro, and attach that macro to the report. You know, you can get as fancy as you want. If you want to include charts or anything like that, you can definitely do that. You don't have to do the pivot table. The only thing you have to do in order to get this to export out and run through is to, before you start the process, record your macro, then save your macro and attach it to the report inside of SmartList. And again, that is done by just going under SmartList Options and Export Solutions. And once you have a macro, you can attach that macro to other reports. So we could go in and take that test BG macro and attach it to the report to the sales report as well. And so if we go into that sales report and go to Excel, you now see that it has two macros under it. So if we selected the test BG, it would run through that process. I already have it open, so it's going to give us an error. So that was our quick SmartList tips and tricks today. Any questions about SmartList, or actually any questions about GP at all?
I think we just had a few questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, how do you remove an existing SmartList?
Okay, so if you want to go in, we'll just remove this one, the sales. So if I click on this sales SmartList and I go into my favorites, you just select remove. And this is a good process to go through to clean up your SmartList. A lot of times you'll get reports. I think I saw one earlier under financial that said, maybe not. I thought there was one that said like yes, here's 2013. So that would be a good one, 2013 balances. You know, I doubt anybody's looking at that in 2017, so I could come into favorites and remove that report. And that will remove it. Okay, any other questions?
I think the only other ones that we had were about GPUG. When is it, where is it, and why should we go?
Okay, so GPUG is an event for Microsoft GP User Group, is what it stands for, and it's last year was the first year that they really did a big GPUG conference. Prior to that, they had a conference that they called Convergence. So they got rid of Convergence and had the GPUG instead. So if you've ever heard people say, you know, I'm going to Convergence, GPUG is the replacement for Convergence. So GPUG is a meeting of users from all over the world, and this year it is going to be in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's going to be October 10th through the 13th. It's a great conference to go to and meet up with other GP users in similar industries. They do separate out. I know last year they had, when you would go to lunch, they had tables separated out by state so you can meet other users in your area. It's also a great time to go and meet Microsoft employees and get, you know, business cards. But they have a lot of great sessions, and they have everything from SmartList to GP tips and tricks to Management Reporter. And when you go to Management Reporter or SQL reporting, they'll do everything from beginning, where you can start at some beginning level sessions, all the way up to advanced. And so maybe on the first day you can go to a few beginner sessions if you're not familiar with it, and then you can kind of work your way up. But they really do have a lot of great sessions that are worth going to. I think everybody can get something out of GPUG. All right. So October, and if you have any questions about it or how to register, you can let us know, but it is October 10th through the 13th in Nashville, Tennessee. So.
Well, I think that was all of the questions. Thank you, Billy, for being here again today, and then we will talk to everyone next month.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.